All right. Hello, 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 everyone. Glad you guys are coming back. Happy Monday to you all. Hope everyone had a great weekend. As we told you last week, we were going to come back with part two of Keep This in Mind. In case you don't know, this April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And one topic around sexual assault that we do not often speak about is male sexual assault. And I'm very happy to share with you all that we were able to speak to a sexual assault survivor who was Ronald McCray. He gave us a great interview last week. And so if you have not had a chance, go back to keep this in mind. You can go see our most recent video. It's called The Tape That Changed My Life, The Emancipation of Ronald McCray. And he agreed to come back for part two so that we can go a little bit deeper with him. Because had we continued to stay on, that would probably be a 2 hour video and y'all would not have watched it. So we had to break that up and to do two different interviews. So I'm very glad to introduce and reintroduce to you all a good friend of mine, a brother, an advocate, a recording artist, an author, an entrepreneur by Ronald McCray. All right, hello there, sir.
What's going on, brother? How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you.
Doing great. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Welcome back to the room. All right. So I know you've been doing this for some time, right? You've been sharing your story. At least I think when I met you in 2019, you
Mhm.
were already speaking out a little bit about your story of being an overcomer of sexual assault. And I think right about 2021, you started sharing a little bit more in depthly about your story. What did it mean for you to share with our audience here and keep this in mind?
I think whenever I go into any opportunity to share, I try to, um, like, one, it's a very vulnerable experience for me.
Mhm.
I realize that it also gives a voice to a lot of people that may not um, have the ability to speak about their experiences. And so, one, it gives voice, and two, I think the people that I'm reaching. There are people who might not ever reach out and say, "Hey, I was like blessed by this," but um, maybe something that I've said they could take away, from the conversation, and it may inspire them to want to pursue wholeness and healing in some way. So I'm always thinking about the people. I'm trying to do a better job of thinking about myself because I would jump straight into things sometimes,
Mhm.
and the zeal and the desire to want to help people will thrust me into situations. And
Yes.
I realize, okay, Ron, you got to take care of yourself. You might have to unplug a little bit because that was raw. But
Mhm.
you are left with the feelings from being so vocal about those experiences. But yeah, to answer your question, I'm always thinking about um, it being an opportunity to help someone.
Wonderful, wonderful. And we want to be able to hear from the people today. So, anyone who's watching this stream while we are live, feel free to drop any comments and any questions you have into the chat. And we're going to do our best to follow along with those and get those questions answered for you all. I'm glad, Ron, that you talked about taking time for yourself because compassion fatigue is very real, right? We know that from those of us who are practitioners in mental health, caring for people all the time, we do need to step back and learn how to take care of ourselves. What are some things that you do, like as someone who is publicly speaking out and you're speaking about such a sensitive topic? What do you do after you're speaking that helps you to relax and take care of your mind and body after you've poured out something so sensitive?
So I think it just depends. Like, one thing that I like to do is just take a long ride, and I'll roll the windows down and let the wind just like beat me in the face.
Mhm.
Sometimes without music, um, just to feel. Sometimes I'll go out and like sit in front of like water. Water is very calming and soothing for me. It's
Mhm.
almost like my thoughts are able to like ripple on the water, and I
Yes.
get release. So water is definitely another. Um, Sometimes I just like to be alone. That's really helpful for me as well, where I can focus on what I'm feeling, and as opposed to being in an environment where there are people, who are constantly like talking to me, which deflects from my ability to really focus in on myself in the moment. And my
Mhm.
wife is like amazing at advocating for me in those moments to take the time that I need to decompress. She's like, I'll take care of home. I got Alex and the dog and the cat. We have two fur babies and one real actual like human child.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
but yeah, like it all just depends on what I'm feeling in the moment. Sometimes like music is very helpful as well. Like I know certain songs that really speak to me in those moments, even when I don't have the words to articulate. I'll let the music kind of you know speak to me. And prayer and meditation is in all ways as well. I will say this though, there have been times when I have been so triggered by something that I talked about as it relates to like being a sexual trauma survivor, and it can send me to such a like place where I just don't even have words for God in that moment. I don't have like
Mm.
the capacity to say, like, Lord, help me through this. And
Mhm.
the beautiful thing about it is He knows what I need, even if I don't have the words to articulate it. And so it doesn't necessarily separate me from Him, but it is to say or to illustrate for people the the depths to which talking about these things can take an individual and
Oh,
to
yes.
be able to come up out of the water to say, "Ooh, okay, that did hurt. All right, this is how I'm feeling." Or I'm mad. I'm in touch with anger right now. I feel like I need to, I want to break something,
Yes.
because they're very real emotions that we have connected to these experiences. Sometimes they get hidden, then in conversation they come up. And I try to do a bit better job of when they come up to let it out so I don't like put it back inside.
Continue to stuff it back down.
Right. Mhm.
So when we did our interview last week, you said something that hit me so hard just before we began recording. And you said that sometimes you forget that you are a sexual assault survivor.
Mhm.
And I don't know if there are other people out there who do forget that, but having lived through such horrific trauma,
Mhm.
how do you forget? Can you help us understand that a little bit?
Sure. So I was reading a book. It's called The Body Keeps the Score.
Hmm.
I can't remember the author, but something like the way that he described a trigger is for an individual who has experienced trauma is when you are triggered, your mind goes back to the event and your body responds to it as if it just happened. And
Hmm.
so, I'm 36, about to be 37 in 2 months. Jeez. Um, and
Pause every time you say that.
and so when I think about like even the first like sexually traumatic event that I had at like age 6 or 7, sometimes it feels like I'm in that living room again. Sometimes I can smell what I smelled in that moment. And so it takes me back to those events, but because it's been so long, there are times in life where it feels that like I'm living life normally. I'm not like caught in the cycles of the trigger where I'm constantly reminded of it, and sometimes like maybe grief comes up in as an emotion, or sometimes anger is present on my mind connected to those experiences. So sometimes I'm not thinking about it at all, and I'm just like thriving in life. And um, then something will be said, maybe in a movie or in a conversation with a friend or in a conversation with my spouse, where I'm triggered in a moment, and it's like, oh yeah, I
Mm.
am. That makes I'm a sexual trauma survivor. Like it's very easy to forget if you're not like constantly living with those experiences on the forefront of your mind. Like I've done a lot of work in the realm of healing. I've come a very long way. But at the same time, I'm still prone to be triggered. And
Right.
so I'm mindful of like even certain movies that I watch. Like if I'm not um, prepared to deal with something like if I'm not prepared to watch a movie and have to like knowingly how it's going may affect me emotionally, I won't watch it.
Mhm.
it's a form of like guarding and protecting myself. So I know that was a really long way of answering your question, but I think when you've done the work of healing, um, you enjoy it. And sometimes you don't, it's just not always on your mind that I've been through all those things. And it has the like when you experience that trigger and you remember that you are a sexual trauma survivor or survivor of any form of trauma, it kind of like attempts to pull you back into that space of like despair and hopelessness. But I have to remind myself like those events happened then. I, you know, it's not happening now, like grounding conversations with myself,
Mhm.
even things that like you have taught me and like my therapist has, taught me as well in those moments when I'm triggered, is to like from a sensory perspective, like dig your like toes into the ground.
Mhm.
Or like to like if I'm sitting in a chair and maybe I'm speaking about my story and I'm being triggered, a way to calm myself in the moment and to ground myself into reality is to I think she said like even to like digging like without making it noticeable into the chair or even like on your arm, like something that reminds you, okay, uh, I am okay. I'm
Yes.
I'm not going to like I'm not where I'm not the 6-year old right now, and so
And you're present.
it helps to keep me present and object focusing. That's another technique as well that's helpful is to concentrate on like an object that's present and it helps me from like really spiraling in certain moments.
Yes. That's one of the my favorite things that I've ever shared with someone that I saw that they did was that they we were working together and they were triggered, and I let them have their moment. I didn't touch them, I didn't move them, but I watched them find their focal point. And they picked up an object and found their focal point and allowed them to come back to the present moment. And what normally would have been possibly like a week of spiraling after
Mm,
that
mm,
was able to they were able to stay present. It only took about 10 minutes to
mm.
get them to regroup and get regrounded to say, I'm here, I'm in the present moment, and I really am okay.
Yeah.
I really am okay. So all of what you're saying is just a reminder of just how healed you are and that healing is possible. Because I often hear with sexual assault, I often hear share, tell what happened,
Mm,
tell somebody something, right? Especially go to the police and talk. But
mhm.
we don't always hear, we sometimes hear, yes, go to therapy and do the work, but we don't hear what the work looks like afterwards. And I think that's what you just shared, that
Yes,
you now live in the healing so that when you're triggered, it's not that the triggers won't come. Now I know how to handle them to stay present
absolutely.
and stay present. In sharing your story, I've gone back to view it a few times. I've heard good feedback
Mhm,
from others who have heard your story. One
mhm,
person in particular said that hearing your story helped them to see their own trauma, even though it was not related to sexual assault. So this
mhm,
is really helping people. Um, but one of the things that I noticed in you sharing
mhm,
is that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong,
mhm.
you did not report your attackers to the police. You did not turn them in.
Correct. That's
Okay.
right. Mhm,
So why is that? Like once you were able to name it, like I understand at the time,
mhm.
there's fear, and that's often what attackers do. They threaten you to keep
Mm,
you quiet because the
right.
longer you stay quiet, the more they're able to perpetrate their offense.
Mhm.
But as you developed your strength and as you healed, can you share a little bit about the decision not to report them or even expose them?
That's a really great question. I do think for many years, the it wasn't just the relative that I often describe that um, perpetuated the first incident of abuse with the two close friends of his. I was afraid of him for many years, and so I thought to like if I shared it openly and like exposed who he was, that he might like seriously hurt me. And so I had wrestled with that fear for years, and like um, now not so much because I am a man that is capable of defending himself, and so I don't like necessarily harbor the same fears that he used to use as tactics against me when I was a small child and defenseless. Um, I think I could handle him at this point. And
First of
so,
all, that whole smile is saying he can get these hands.
yeah, he could
He
get
can get these
the
hands today. Yes, gotcha. Okay.
um, but I think at this point, and the reason why I'm like pausing somewhat or hesitating in how I respond is because I want to be careful of the detail that I share about the why, because it could easily identify who he is if I just say it the way that I want to.
Mhm.
But I think it's more so of a desire to protect individuals in his life that I care about. I'll say that much.
Got it.
Um,
Okay.
and also, I don't know that me exposing who he is will help me to heal in any way.
Mhm.
I think what I care about at this point and over the past several years has like my focus has been on like Ron healing from those experiences. And I feel that the for me to expose who my abuser was, it would cause a lot of disruption in the family. And I just don't want the drama. I
Understood.
don't. I would much rather focus on me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what would you say to others who are watching this,
Mhm,
who might be in the midst of abuse, or it could be years since this has happened,
mhm,
and it has not been reported? And especially if you come to therapy,
mhm,
we're mandated reporters, and so
mhm.
once the information has been disclosed to us by law, these are things that we have to report.
Sure.
What do you say to other survivors
Mm,
in terms of whether or not they should report this to the police, let their therapist know,
mhm,
call CPS or even Adult Protective Services in
mhm.
case this is occurring to a vulnerable adult? What is your message to them?
Sure. So I would start by saying that anyone who has experienced any form of sexual trauma, if you are wrestling with whether or not you should tell someone, um, because maybe it has been like years since the incident occurred. I respect everyone's decision whether to disclose or not to disclose. However, I think that there are certain like dynamics where you absolutely should tell. Like if you are a minor and you are presently experiencing abuse, please do not remain silent, because there is help available for you. Because I think it's easy to like I was stuck in that silence when I was a little boy. I didn't know that there were resources that were available to me. I didn't even have the words, the vocabulary to say I am being abused. I was not aware of that. And
Mhm.
so um, now, with me knowing what those experiences were, I can speak to young people to help them to understand what's happening to you is not okay. It's not something that you should remain silent about. And um, if you are a minor, identify someone that is safe, that you can trust, that you can disclose to. And again, as you mentioned, there are individuals who are mandated reporters, like going to therapy, like clergy in the church, like your counselors, guidance counselors in school. They are mandated reporters.
Attention all areas.
Know that in
Sorry
you
about that.
decision to disclose who your abuser is, you are not at fault for anything that has happened. And
Right.
it is the duty of the individuals, once it's been reported, because if you're a minor, it's going to be reported to Child Protective Services. You will be protected in that process. And so I also do know that, as you mentioned, adults are victims of sexual abuse as well. Um,
Hmm.
the senior population or those who are disabled are individuals who are among some of those who experience sexual abuse as well.
Absolutely.
And again, these are the more vulnerable population who are unable to defend themselves. As
Hmm.
we always hear, if you see something, say something. I personally feel that just because of who I am, If I'm aware of even the possibility that there may be some form of sexual misconduct happening, I'm going to say something.
Yeah. And you don't have to prove it.
You don't have to prove it exactly.
You do not have to prove it. Even those of us who are mandated reporters or whatever, we do not have to prove that an individual is experiencing a sexual assault or
Right.
any form of abuse for
Right.
that matter. If you have a suspicion, you simply make a report in good faith and you give all the information that you can.
Right.
But you do not have to go and prove it. Those who you report it to, they're the ones, it's the burden becomes on them to make the investigation.
Right.
Our job is just to it's really being a good neighbor.
Mhm.
You see something, you speak. You never know whose life you're saving or
Right.
have changed by
Right.
your choice to speak up.
And I do want to make sure that this is very clear. The My reasoning for not choosing to disclose who my abusers were is my decision. But it doesn't mean that someone else should not disclose. If I was younger, if I was that younger me and I was aware of what I know now, I would have gone to someone and told them. I absolutely would have. But because for me, it's been so many years between the events and because of the work of healing that I've done, and because I do not see that disclosing who those people are is necessary on my journey, that's the reason why I haven't. But I absolutely believe the right thing to do would be for an individual to disclose because it allows you to get help, and it allows the individuals who have, you know, done the abusing to be held accountable for their actions.
So your abuse started when you were 6 years old and it ended. Do you know? Are you able to kind of guess about what year it ended?
So I think in total, from what I can remember, I've experienced under the umbrella of, we'll say, sexual trauma. I probably had about like 9 abusers, and
Okay,
so
about
the first incident that we've been discussing with this male relative and his 2 male friends, I don't know the exact like time mark, but I would say it may have been a few years. Um,
okay.
but the although the sexual form of the abuse stopped at some point, the verbal and physical abuse continued for
Mhm.
years. And so, um, yeah, so to answer your question, that's when that first experience of being abused stopped.
And
But there were other people, like family members, friends, and even like I write about in my book when I was on my first job at um, a very well known fast food restaurant in Washington, D.C. I was 15 and 9 months, and the cook that I was, that I had to work with, he constantly like verbally, sexually assaulted me, and at times physically as well, and used coercion. And um, so, again, there were a number of different experiences with different people where I experienced some form of sexual assault.
and then over those 10 years, was it all concealed or what were some of the signs that either friends, family, or professionals might have been able to recognize with you to say that something wasn't right, that there's something different with this young man or kid, whatever you would say at the time, that
Mhm.
said we should pry a little bit and find out what's going on.
I think the abuse that I experienced went under the radar for so long. I think people just assumed that I was just introverted or that I was just to myself. But it at some point, I guess I became guarded and a little bit more like reserved in my approach with people. I was very distrusting with men, extremely. Like I always questioned their intentions for wanting to like get close to me or even get to know me. Um, I often felt more comfortable around women. My now late second cousin, after I like started sharing my story about having experienced sexual trauma, she said there was a time when you just became very distant from the family, like you stopped coming around as much. You said you um, just seemed very closed off, and I didn't even realize it until she like mentioned that.
Hmm.
outside of that, I don't think anybody else would have known by observing, like, my behaviors that something might have been going on, and if they did, no one ever probed further to find out if something had happened.
Which is a good lesson in that if we see a change in behavior, speak to it.
Mhm.
And even looking back, your cousin noticing that this used to come around and now, oh no, I can't do it. I'm not here anymore with no explanation
Right.
that something else could possibly be happening. We
Mhm.
really do have to pay attention to our children.
Yeah.
Pay attention to their children when their mood changes, appetite, sleep changes, behavioral changes, and we can't really explain them. Take the time, talk to them, find out what's going on. Show up at the school.
Right.
Make a pop up visit. No, I want to see where my son or daughter is and what's happening.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think it's very important that for parents, um, listen to your children. Like, engage them in conversation when they come home from daycare. Like, "How was your day?" Or when they come home from school, "What did you do today?" Like, my wife and I are so, like, intentional about like, building a relationship with our son where he feels comfortable telling us anything. Like, and because they feel safe enough talking to you, your child might randomly say, "Oh, this friend said such and such to me." And, my wife and I recently, became aware of something that, made us have reason for concern, and we were able to respond appropriately based on what we had heard.
Hmm.
Um, but if we didn't have that safe space with our child, you know, we may not have ever known, some things that were going on. And so I think it's important for parents to have a relationship with your children, um, because you can be clued into, think conversations, inappropriate things that might be said around your child, and you'll have an opportunity to respond appropriately, as opposed to when they get home, oh, just put them in front of the TV or just send them outside. No, take the time to engage your child, and they will open up. So that's I think a way that parents can be a little bit more attuned to their children, or those children who have experienced abuse. Um, th- Again, like when I was a child, I didn't have a vocabulary for it, but I think if my parents might have engaged me a bit more and been a bit more involved in my world, I
Hmm.
think they would have been able to pick up certain things, or like, I would have felt more comfortable to say, um, such and such did this to me, or they showed me this tape. My dad didn't find out that I was abused until I was 18. Um, and I remember that moment like it was yesterday. Like, we were having a conversation about, someone that I was dating at the time, and I, just opened up to him and told him what had happened to me when I was younger, and he just like stood there. Um, I can't imagine what that would be like. Like, I pray I never have to experience that, like, with
Hmm.
my child. I pray my child never experiences any form of sexual abuse as I did when I was a child. But I can only imagine what that felt like for a parent whose child is telling them that they've been abused, and then to realize as that parent that they didn't have an opportunity to protect their child.
From what you remember, do you think Dad was he, of course, shocked? Was he
Mhm.
supportive? Like, was he trying to go after the person who did it? Like, what was his like? What happened as a result of sharing it with him?
Um, well, I would have loved the opportunity to be able to, like, have a conversation with him now as an adult, because he didn't take any action. I think from that conversation, it was more of like new information that he was learning.
Mhm.
Um, I don't even know if he would have known the right actions to take to address what had happened to me. Um, and in his generation, and this is not to like give an excuse whatsoever, but in his generation, those types of conversations were taboo. They were swept under the rug. But I wish that um, in the individuals in my family who did become aware of what was going on, that I would have been advocated for. Like, to this day, and I've never said this publicly, um, there are still sorry, one second.
Mhm.
To this day, since I've been sharing my story for so many years, there are still family members who have not come to me and said anything at all. Um,
Right.
and that has been um, it's been very painful because
Mhm.
it sends the message that you don't care. Uh,
Right.
and yeah, so I wish I would have had someone to advocate for me as a child and as an adult and as an adult.
And I think that probably stops many people from sharing, feeling that no one will care, feeling that no one will respond, or maybe they've already shared once and they were told it's a lie, this person wouldn't do it or they wouldn't do that. But the abuse or that trauma is still present
Right.
and there's no advocacy, there's no support. And so I think that's so important. Why there are organizations like the Survivor Circle,
Mhm,
specifically for men, where they can have a space to open up and get the advocacy for them that
mhm,
may not be available in their families. Because
mhm,
while yes, previous generations didn't have the words to speak about it, I still believe that there are probably families now, even
mhm,
with widespread attention on it on social media. It's
mhm,
Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and they're still turning a blind eye and not wanting to accept. It's a hard reality, but
mhm.
not wanting to accept that this has happened or is happening to my child or to my loved one.
Absolutely,
To
absolutely.
my loved one. Um, what are your thoughts about parents who have been sexually assaulted
Mhm,
sharing that with their children?
mhm. Um, I've never been asked that question before. I do think at some point when my son is of age, like he's going to know, like because his mother and I are public, like and vocal with our stories. We have books. We have done many interviews about our stories. I would rather find out.
I'm so sorry. Can you repeat that, because someone's on the other side of this wall having a whole jam session? Yeah. And I can't reach through it to stop them. So can you repeat that again so we can hear you?
I was saying that I've never been asked that question before, of how I feel about like parents disclosing to their children that them as parents have been abused.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe it might be helpful, like as I'm talking with the noise in the background, if you maybe mute on your side, that way the audience can still hear.
Yes. Let me.
Okay.
I think someone got him. Okay. Go ahead.
um, but I think that at some point, um, I would like to have a conversation with my son only because I am vocal with my story, and I would
Mhm.
much rather he find out like through me as opposed to being on the internet or on YouTube and stumble across my story. Um,
Right.
I again, it goes back to a relationship. I think
Hmm.
like if my parents were ever abused, if they have been, I don't know. Um, but in terms of their, if they were, and in terms of their ability to relate to me, it would be extremely helpful because it would make me feel like less alone. Like I am aware of parents who have said to their children, "Oh, that happened to me too," and the result that I've seen of it having on the child is they feel more connected to their parent, and it feels less like they're just isolated in this experience by themselves, but the parent also understands a lot of the feelings that the child is experiencing.
Hmm.
And um, hopefully, the parent will advocate for their child's, um, get taking advantage of the resources, like taking them to therapy. Like a friend of mine told me, like when his mother found out that he was being abused by a relative at probably like 10, his mom said to him, this happened to me, and like immediately like sought out counseling for him, and he was so grateful for that. So um, I would encourage parents, like if you have experienced any form of sexual trauma and your child has become, um, a victim of trauma as well, that could be a very much needed like connection point for you and your child so that they don't feel by themselves and spiral because they feel like um, they're the only person in the world that has experienced this. And I will also say this, like, what is also helpful is individuals who are willing to speak up and share their stories. It shows that there are so many of us who have had these experiences and know you are absolutely not alone. There is a community of people who love you, who will advocate for you, and who will walk this journey of life with you.
Yes. And I would even add to that that not only sharing if your child has been through it, but sharing so that they'll be able to recognize the signs of what could or could not happen. And I think about intimate partner violence. You
Mm,
know, that when your children are of age enough that they want to start dating, share your experiences, share the things that happened to you,
mhm,
that I didn't want this to happen, but I was actually raped, or
mm,
and I was assaulted, and this is what happened, and this is how you can avoid it.
mhm.
Matter of fact, I don't even know if you've heard of this. I just learned about it today, but April 24th is actually Denim Day.
No, I did not know that.
Yeah, so Denim Day actually started as a result of something happening, I believe it was in Italy.
Mhm,
The Italian Supreme Court ruled on a case where a woman was sexually assaulted, and I think they reversed the ruling because they said her jeans were too tight, and
mm,
so therefore she must have had to help her attacker
mm,
pull the jeans down, and was therefore implied consent to
mm.
the sexual act.
Wow.
And so, in frustration and in protest, ladies showed up to Parliament the next day wearing jeans
Mm,
and in solidarity with the victim.
mm,
And it was in 1999 in LA, they had heard about this story coming across on CNN, and a
mm,
group of people got together at one of the courthouses to wear denim in support of the victim. And
mm,
so now it's now an international movement, Denim Day,
mm,
to wear denim on April 24th as a way to bring solidarity and
mm.
show support to persons who have been victims of sexual assault.
Wow.
So we encourage everyone. I know we're going to be doing it here, one of my locations where I provide services, but April 24th is Denim Day to show solidarity to persons who have been victims of sexual assault. That is one, it's not your fault. You
Mhm.
didn't wear something that you should not have worn.
Right,
You weren't too revealing. If you chose to wear that, you chose to wear, but you are not in. It is not your fault how someone chose to respond to you because of what you had on or what you did not have on.
right.
That's not your fault.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That is not your fault. Um, we did get one question where someone wanted to know from you. They
Mhm,
said they understand the spiritual aspect of your life. That faith has been very important to you.
mhm.
But what were the steps? Like, what was one of the things that you had to do in order to be able to build your confidence and regain your voice that was suffocated through assault?
Mm, mhm. That's a really good question. Um, can you restate the question for me one more time?
Yes. What did you have to do or start in order to be able to regain your voice
Mhm,
and find your confidence that was suffocated through sexual assault?
mm. Um, that I have to do. I th- I think at some point I realized the harm that I was allowing to be done to me by suppressing how I really felt about things that I felt where I was being wronged.
Mhm.
I was the one that had to deal with the negative emotions as a result of things that people said to me, while they were seemingly able to just like, go about their lives as if they didn't just like drop a bomb on me, um, that would hurt me, that I would have to like live with. And I found myself stuck in this cycle of like anger and and feeling like again that because of maybe who this person was, and I'm going to be a little specific without naming names, because of who this person was in the church, I chose not to talk about how much they hurt me and the
Mhm.
things that they said to tear me down. And again, it went back to feeling like I had to protect them for whatever reason. I felt that way about my the abuser in my family when I was younger. There was a part of me that felt like I have to protect him because if I share this, it could negatively affect his life. I carried that over to certain experiences in life where um, I I felt that my voice was being suppressed, and if I decided to say something, I feared the damage that it would do to them. It's like I cared more about them than maybe they cared about me. And so at some point, I realized how unhealthy it was and the harm that it was doing to me to allow myself to be silent. And I will even say this: it got to the point where I contemplate, like I really wrestled with not wanting to live.
Hmm.
I wrestled a lot with suicidal thoughts because I felt that I was a slave to I don't even know the perfect words to put to it, but I was a slave to the and like the silence that I was like in bondage, if I can say it that way. Um, and I got tired of or became tired of living in those cycles, and I wanted different. And so I made the decision, and it was somewhere around 35, like I said in part one of this conversation
Hmm.
last week. Something just changed in me when I turned 35. Um, and I started to advocate more for me. I started to care a lot more about me than I did um, other people's feelings.
I think you froze for a second. Let's see if we can bring you back. Okay, so while we wait for him to come back, I think it's frozen on his end. Remember, we'll be on for a little bit longer. Remember, you could drop questions in the comments or even send us a private message. It's just something that you want to learn from Ronald McCray. Again, as we wait for him to come back, remember he is also a part of the Survivor Circle. Okay, he's a regional director in Columbia, Maryland, where he provides services to men who have been survivors of sexual assault. So it's a place where they can come and share and also access resources to begin to help them out. Okay. I think he's dropped off, and so that's okay. It's okay. We're live where things happen. I want to thank you guys so much for coming and joining us on part two of the Emancipation of Ronald McCray, the tape that changed our life. Don't forget to follow us here on Keep This in Mind. And remember, if you want to connect with Ronald McCray, you can reach him on Instagram on I am Ron J. McCray. You can also go to his website for photography. I believe it's rjmphotographyllc.com. And as always, thank you for joining us and keep this in mind.